The phrase light year feels like something we already understand. It sits in the mind like a piece of science vocabulary we picked up long ago, filed away beside black hole and galaxy in orbit, familiar enough that it stops feeling strange. But a light year is one of those ideas that only seems comfortable at a distance. The closer we get to it, the more it begins to damage our ordinary sense of reality, because it does not simply describe something far away. It describes a universe where distance becomes delay, where seeing becomes a form of looking backward, and where the present itself starts to thin out the farther we look. If you enjoy this kind of slow, deep dive into the structure of reality, subscribe and stay with me. The reward in this one is not just a definition, but a different way of seeing the sky above your head. We can begin in a room, because that is where our minds still work properly. A room is built for the kind of creature we are. You look across it, and the far wall is simply there. You do not think about the time it takes light to reach your eyes from the lamp, or from a hand raised at the other end of the table, because the delay is so small, it might as well not exist. In a room, distance is distance. Near things are now. Far things are also now. The world arrives as one seamless present. Step outside, and the same basic rule still seems to hold. Across a street, across a city, across an ocean, we remain inside scales where the world feels immediate. Even when something is far away, it is far in the ordinary sense. It takes longer to reach, harder to cross, more fuel, more money, more patience. But it is still inside the same emotional category. Far is still human far. That intuition survives longer than it should. It survives into maps, into airplanes, into satellite images, into all the quiet technologies that make Earth feel manageable. We can fly across a continent in hours. We can circle the planet in less than 2 days. We can send a message around the world so quickly that waiting has almost disappeared from daily life. The distances of Earth are not small, but they are tame enough that feedback remains fast. We act, and the world answers back. A light year belongs to a different kind of universe. The first misunderstanding is the simplest one. A light year is not a measure of time. It is a measure of distance. Specifically, it is the distance light travels in 1 year through the vacuum of space, moving at about 300,000 kilometers every second. That sounds like a clean fact, maybe even a mildly interesting one, until we let the words stay in the room with us for a moment. Light, the thing that already feels instantaneous in ordinary life, the thing so fast our bodies treat it as immediate, has to keep moving for an entire year to make 1 light year. That is when the floor begins to shift. Because if light itself needs a year, then everything slower than light is not just slower. It is almost disqualified from the conversation. Our cars disappear. Our planes disappear. Even the fastest machines we have ever built begin to look less like vehicles and more like hesitation. But before we go too far outward, it helps to stop at the first place where the universe gently warns us that our intuition has limits. The moon. It feels close. It dominates the night sky. It shapes the tides, pulls at the oceans, shows us its face with such familiarity that for most of human history, it felt less like an object and more like a presence. And yet moonlight does not arrive instantly. It takes about 1.3 seconds to get here. That is not very long. It is short enough to sound trivial, but it is long enough to feel. Imagine standing on Earth and speaking to someone on the moon by radio. You say hello. Your voice, traveling at light speed, takes more than a second to arrive. Their reply takes more than a second to come back. Suddenly the conversation develops a gap. Not a technological failure, not interference. Reality itself has inserted a pause. Even at the distance of the moon, the universe is already refusing to let faraway things be immediate. And this is still our nearest celestial neighbor. The sun pushes the lesson further. Sunlight takes a little over 8 minutes to reach Earth. When the sun touches your face in the morning, you are not feeling the sun as it is now. You are feeling a message that left more than 8 minutes ago. If the sun vanished, and let me be clear, this is only a thought experiment, we would continue to see it shining in the sky for those final minutes. The light, already on its way, would keep arriving. And Earth would go on behaving as if nothing had changed, until that last, old sunlight reached us. That is a difficult idea for the brain to hold in a relaxed way. The star that defines day itself is never actually present to us. We live by delayed contact with it. Our warmth is old. Our daylight is old. The thing that feels most immediate is already history. This is the quiet beginning of what a light year really means. It means that in space, distance and time are no longer separate experiences. The farther away something is, the older your view of it becomes. Looking outward is looking backward. There is no clear line where this suddenly starts being true. It was already true in the room. The difference is that in the room, it does not matter. By the time we reach the moon and the sun, it starts to matter a little. Soon it will matter so much that ordinary language begins to feel flimsy. And still, we have not even left the local neighborhood. Most diagrams of the solar system are lies of kindness. They are trying to help, and in helping, they destroy the reality. Textbook planets sit neatly spaced across a page, each one visible, arranged like stops along a route. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the outer giants beyond. The picture is useful if you want order. It is disastrous if you want truth. Space is not arranged for our convenience. It is mostly emptiness, and almost all of that emptiness is hidden from us by the way we draw it. Earth is about 1 astronomical unit from the sun, a phrase astronomers use for the average Earth-Sun distance. Light crosses that distance in a little over 8 minutes. That is a helpful bridge unit because it reminds us that even inside the inner solar system, we are already measuring reality in light travel time. Jupiter is not simply farther than Mars, in the way one town is farther than another. It is farther in a way that begins to alter communication, waiting, and the meaning of response. Out near Neptune, sunlight is not a fresh presence. It is hours old. Pluto, which many people still carry in memory as the edge, is not the edge at all. It is only one small marker in a much more stretched and lonely system. Beyond the planets lies the heliosphere, the vast bubble shaped by the solar wind. Beyond that lies a colder and dimmer region where the sun's influence thins but does not simply stop. And farther still, as far as our best models suggest, there may be the Oort cloud, a huge distant reservoir of icy bodies, extending perhaps a significant fraction of a light year, maybe even beyond, which means something unsettling. A light year is not only a way of measuring the distance between stars, it may also be a useful way of talking about the outermost reach of our own solar system. If by solar system, we mean not just the bright, orderly planets, but the full dispersed territory of the sun's gravitational domain. The unit we associate with interstellar space is already waiting for us at home. And once that sinks in, the next question arrives with a kind of cold inevitability. If our own system is this spread out, what does the nearest star actually mean? The nearest star sounds like it should be a small step beyond the edge, the way the next town begins where one city ends. That is how human geography teaches us to think. There is always another place just past the last place. But the nearest star is not the next stop after Pluto, or after the heliopause, or even after the most distant swarms of frozen debris that may still belong to the sun. It is separated from us by a gulf so large that the entire planetary system behind us starts to look almost local by comparison. That star is Proxima Centauri. Its light takes about 4.24 years to reach us. The number is easy to say, and that is part of the danger. Numbers can pass through the mind without touching it. 4.24 years. Clean, calm, almost modest. But this is where the light year starts doing the work promised by its name. The distance is not just large, it breaks the ordinary grammar of far. Proxima is close only in the way one era can be close to another, when measured against geologic time. It is not close in any sense your body understands. A message sent there at light speed would take more than 4 years to arrive. A reply, sent instantly the moment it was received, would take more than 4 years to come back. You could ask a question and wait nearly a decade for the fastest possible answer permitted by the structure of the universe. Not because our technology is weak, but because this is what nearness means once space opens up beyond the warmth of the sun's immediate company. That changes the emotional category of communication itself. We are used to dialogue. Even delay, in ordinary life, usually means seconds, minutes, maybe hours. Across oceans and continents, the answer comes while we still remember the exact texture of the question. At interstellar distance, conversation turns into correspondence. It becomes something more like sending a letter to descendants. One generation speaks, another receives. Even the fastest possible exchange begins to feel historical. And this is with the nearest star. If we tried to travel there with our present-day spacecraft, the result would be almost more disturbing than the number itself. Voyager 1, one of the fastest and farthest traveling human-made objects ever launched, is moving at an extraordinary speed by human standards. Yet at that pace, reaching the vicinity of Proxima Centauri would take tens of thousands of years. Human engineering does not merely struggle with the distance, it barely enters the same scale. The problem is not that the journey is difficult in the way climbing a mountain is difficult. The problem is that the mountain belongs to a different world than our legs. That is when the nearest star stops feeling like a destination and begins to feel like a verdict. We can make this more concrete without flattening it into a cheap comparison. Imagine a mission launched not by you, not even by your grandchildren, but by a civilization that has forgotten the names of the people who began it. Languages would erode, religions would rise and collapse, borders would vanish and be redrawn. Entire historical ages would pass, while the craft remained in transit, still not having arrived at the nearest star. The journey would outlive memory. It might outlive the reason it began. This is what a light year does when it stops being abstract. It reveals that our common ideas about travel were built in a tiny provincial district of reality. The night sky hides this from us through appearance. Stars look close together because we see them projected onto the same dark surface. They seem pinned to a dome. A constellation can feel almost decorative, a pattern we inherited, a set of points arranged into hunters and animals and myths. But the stars in a constellation are usually not neighbors in the deep physical sense. They only line up from where we happen to be. Some are relatively nearby, others are much farther off. The sky looks flat because our position is narrow, our eyes are small, and the light has been patient enough to make very different distances appear side by side. This creates one of the strangest emotional shifts in astronomy. The more familiar the stars become culturally, the less familiar they become physically. Orion feels known. The Big Dipper feels known. Sirius feels known. But what we know, at first, is mostly their appearance from Earth, not their actual arrangement in space, not their different histories, not the different moments in the past from which their light began traveling. The sky is full of objects that look like companions and are, in reality, separated by enormous, silent intervals. Even the bright stars we think of as neighbors are usually not neighbors in a humanly usable sense. A few light years, a few dozen light years, a few hundred. Each phrase sounds manageable, right until we remember what a single light year really is. 100 light years does not mean rather far away. It means the light reaching us tonight left when people here were living in a different historical mood. The star you see is not participating in your moment. It is reporting from another one. This is where astronomy becomes a study not only of distance, but of broken simultaneity. We say that two things exist at once, and in some broad physical sense, they do. Yet we never encounter them at once. The universe does not hand us a shared now across great distance. It hands us layered arrivals. This star from a few years ago, that one from a century ago, another from much farther back. A telescope does not gather the present, it gathers surviving light. And once that idea settles, even very ordinary stargazing changes character. You are no longer just looking up at a set of lights scattered through darkness. You are standing beneath a ceiling of delayed testimony. Every point is a report in transit. Every brightness has been traveling toward you through emptiness for its own length of time. Some of those journeys are short enough that, on stellar timescales, not much has changed. Others come from stars that may already be different in important ways. Some may have shed layers, swollen, dimmed, collapsed, exploded, or moved on from the state in which their light first departed. Care is important here because it is easy to turn this into a cheap line about every star already being dead, and that is not true. Many stars change slowly enough that the version we see is, for all practical purposes, close to the version that exists now. The point is subtler, and in some ways, more unsettling. We are never seeing any distant star exactly as it is now. We are always receiving what distance allows us to receive. The more distant the object, the older the report. That makes the night sky feel less like a place and more like an archive. The moon was a 1.3-second delay. The sun is an 8-minute delay. Proxima Centauri is a 4.24-year delay. Already a pattern is forming, and it is not just numerical. It is philosophical in the plainest sense. Near things are not as near as they feel. Far things are not merely farther. They are earlier. A light year is where the idea of simple presence begins to fall apart. And we still have not reached the galaxy. Before we do, it helps to pause in the region between single stars and that much larger structure, because this is where loneliness really enters the picture. Space is often described as full of stars, and that is true in a statistical way. But to live inside a galaxy is not to live in a crowded room. Most of a galaxy is distance. Even in our local stellar neighborhood, the separations are so severe that each star system is more like an island than a house on the same street. The stars share a galaxy, the way remote mountain villages share a continent. This matters because our imagination often cheats. We see science fiction maps with routes between stars, networks, corridors, alliances, and the mind starts to shrink the problem without permission. It converts interstellar separation into a version of long-distance politics or maritime trade. But if nothing can outrun light, then every star-spanning civilization, every interstellar agreement, every warning, every act of diplomacy, every request for help, every declaration of intent, all of it would be shaped by delay so deep that quick coordination would become impossible. Decision and consequence would drift apart. A society spread across multiple stars would not think the way an empire on Earth thinks. It could not. Even if travel became much faster than anything we can do now, communication itself would still be burdened by years, decades, centuries, depending on the scale. Different worlds would live in partially disconnected presence. They would not simply be separated by space, but by response time, by lag, by the inability to truly share one immediate political moment. The light year is not just a distance, it is a fracture line in the idea of togetherness. And once we understand that around a few nearby stars, the Milky Way begins to loom in a much harsher form. Because the galaxy is not a decorative spray of stars around us. It is a structure so wide that even light, moving with the full speed limit of the universe, needs roughly 100,000 years to cross it. The number does not just widen the scale, it destroys the hope that star system and galaxy belong to neighboring categories of thought. They do not. They belong to different failures of intuition. 100,000 years is long enough for the phrase itself to lose shape. We can say it, but we do not live inside spans like that. Civilization, in the ordinary sense, is younger than that by a great margin. Agriculture is younger, cities are younger, writing is younger. The organized memory of our species occupies only a thin strip beside a number like that. So when we say the Milky Way is roughly 100,000 light-years across, we are not describing a large version of something familiar. We are stepping into a structure so extended that human historical time starts to look like weather. The Milky Way is often shown as a graceful spiral, luminous and serene, which it is. But that image can make it feel finished, almost tidy. From the inside, it is something else entirely. A vast, rotating system of stars, gas, dust, dark matter, old remnants, newborn suns, dead suns, violent regions, quiet regions, crowded inner territories, and thinner outskirts. All of it spread across an expanse that no human journey has ever sampled in any direct way. We belong to it completely, and still we know it mostly by inference, mapping, and patient light. Our own sun sits far from the galactic center, in one of the spiral arms, not at the heart of things, not at the edge, simply somewhere in the broad provincial suburbs of a stellar city, too large to feel like a city. And even here, in our relatively local region, the nearest stars remain light years apart. So when we talk about the galaxy containing hundreds of billions of stars, the mind is tempted to imagine density. It imagines a cosmic metropolis. But galaxies are not packed the way city lights are packed. They are immense frameworks of separation. Their magnificence is made not only of abundance, but of emptiness stretched between points of fire. This is one of the places where the light year really begins to injure the brain in a productive way, because we carry two ideas that do not sit well together. One is that the galaxy is our home. The other is that light itself takes about 100,000 years to cross it. Home, to a human being, implies reachability. It implies a place whose parts belong to one life, one system of travel, one shared present. The Milky Way does not grant that feeling. It is home in the gravitational sense, not in the intimate one. We live inside it, but almost all of it is forever outside the scale of direct human experience. Even if, in some far future, a civilization could move between stars with speeds far beyond ours, the galaxy would still refuse to become small. A message sent from one side to the other would take something like 100,000 years to arrive if it traveled at light speed, not with bad engineering. With perfect obedience to the deepest rule we know, by the time the answer returned, entire branches of culture would have transformed beyond recognition. Politics, identity, memory, even the meaning of the original message would have drifted. So a galaxy is not just a collection, it is a fragmentation machine. It breaks simultaneity into enormous pieces. This is not speculation in the loose sense. We do not need aliens or futuristic ships to feel the point. We already live inside a simpler version of it. The farther outward we look in our own galaxy, the older the light becomes. A star 10,000 light-years away is being seen as it was when human civilization was still in its early chapters. A region 50,000 light-years away is reporting from before anything like modern history existed. We can map the galaxy, yes. We can model it, measure it, observe it in radio, infrared, visible light, and other wavelengths. But what we receive from distant parts of it does not belong to our present. It arrives with delay built in. That transforms astronomy from a spatial science into a temporal one. A telescope is not just a device for making small things look bigger or faint things brighter. It is an instrument for collecting old arrivals. Nearer objects send recent news. Distant ones send older news. Enough distance, and the very act of seeing becomes archaeology. There is a peculiar humility in that. We often speak as if knowledge conquers distance, and in one sense it does. We have learned extraordinary things about the galaxy without leaving our small planetary orbit. But knowledge does not erase the structure of reality. It lets us understand the structure more clearly. The more clearly we understand it, the less available the universe becomes to the instincts that helped us survive on Earth. Think of what daily life assumes. You look, and what you see is more or less now. You call, and an answer can come back while the first thought is still warm. You travel, and the place you reach still belongs to the same broad social moment you left. Even history, in ordinary life, feels layered but manageable. The dead are behind us. The living are with us. The future is ahead. The galaxy does not respect those categories. In the galaxy, the living can only be seen in old light. The present is local. The farther away the object, the deeper into its past you must accept as the price of seeing it at all. A star can be alive now, changed now, gone now, and still be arriving to us as it once was. The sky turns "is" into something slippery. This becomes even more disorienting when we remember that our own sun is moving through the galaxy. It orbits the galactic center once every roughly 225 to 250 million years. That number is so large that it almost resists narration. One orbit. One galactic year, sometimes people call it, though that phrase needs care because it can make the journey sound decorative. For the sun to go once around the Milky Way, dinosaurs had to come and go. Mammals had to rise. Primates had to emerge. Humanity had to appear incredibly late in the motion. We have not completed one galactic orbit since our species existed. That is a shivering fact when it lands properly. Our entire story, everything we call ancient and modern, empire and revolution and science and memory, has unfolded during a tiny fraction of one slow turn through the galaxy. The sun has been carrying us around the Milky Way at enormous speed, and yet the path is so vast that all recorded history amounts to almost nothing against a single circuit. So when people speak casually of our place in the galaxy, the phrase is doing more work than it seems. Place usually means location. Here, it also means duration. We are not just in a certain region of the Milky Way. We are in a fleeting moment of its motion, a brief local arrangement inside a much longer drift. The galaxy is not standing still while we inspect it. We are inside its movement, seeing delayed portions of a system in which we ourselves are also delayed participants. And even then, the Milky Way is not the whole scale. It only feels final because our brains are already tired. There is another move outward that the light year forces on us once the galaxy has become even partially real. If our galaxy is this large, are galaxies themselves close together? Do they sit side by side like islands in an archipelago, distant but reachable in the same broad emotional way? Or does the same injury happen again, one level higher? The nearest large galaxy to the Milky Way is Andromeda. Its light takes about 2.5 million years to reach us. That means when we look at Andromeda, even with the naked eye from a dark enough place, we are seeing a galaxy as it was long before any human city existed, long before writing, long before agriculture, long before anything we would recognize as civilization. In fact, the light entering the eye tonight began its journey when early human ancestors were living lives unimaginably remote from our own. And that changes the feeling of the night sky again. Not because it becomes less beautiful, but because beauty stops being present tense. That faint smear in the darkness is not a neighboring object shining in our shared moment. It is an old arrival from a time before us, crossing millions of years to reach a species that did not yet exist when it began. And once you let that settle, it becomes very hard to look at the sky as decoration ever again. Andromeda does something unusual to the mind, because it is both visible and impossible. You can see it under a dark sky without a telescope, not in the rich photograph detail we know from books and screens, but as a faint, elongated haze, a soft mark in the darkness. There is something almost intimate about that. A human eye, unaided, can catch light that has crossed intergalactic space. It feels like access. Then the meaning arrives. That light left Andromeda around 2.5 million years ago. What your eye receives in a single quiet glance began traveling long before any human being capable of language, architecture, writing, or memory, in our sense, was here to receive it. That is when the word visible stops meaning near. Andromeda is often described as our neighboring large galaxy, and again the language is useful while also being deceptive. Neighboring, to us, suggests practical relation. It suggests that one thing meaningfully sits beside another within the same local life. But 2.5 million light-years is not a neighborhood of contact. It is a neighborhood only by cosmic standards, the way two mountain ranges on opposite sides of a continent might seem close from orbit. Between the Milky Way and Andromeda stretches a depth so severe that the human species has spent its entire existence beneath light that left there before we became ourselves. This is why a light year is so much more than a conversion factor. It forces a painful correction in scale, but also intense. When we say Andromeda is 2.5 million light years away, we are also saying that our view of it is 2.5 million years old. Distance and delay are locked together. You do not get one without the other. The farther you look, the more the universe withholds simultaneity. And once that is clear, astronomy stops being a search for remote things and becomes, more honestly, a practice of receiving layered times. The moon is yesterday's nothing, almost no delay at all. The sun is 8 minutes old. Proxima is a few years old. Distant stars in the Milky Way may be thousands or tens of thousands of years old in the light we receive. Andromeda is millions of years old. Each object arrives carrying its own timestamp, not stamped on the surface, but built into the fact that light has a finite speed, and reality does not stop moving while light is in transit. Telescopes deepen this in a way that can feel almost eerie once you really let it in. Bigger telescopes do not simply make the universe larger to our senses. They make it older. They collect fainter light, and fainter light often means light from farther away, which means older news. Every increase in observational power is not just an increase in reach. It is a deepening of our ability to look into the past. To build a better telescope is, in one important sense, to build a more powerful time machine, though not one that takes us there. It only lets old light arrive more clearly. That phrase, time machine, can sound theatrical if handled badly, but here it is simply the cleanest description of what is happening. We do not travel through time when we look far away. We receive time that has traveled to us. The difference matters. There is no magic in it, no loophole, just light crossing emptiness while the source changes, moves, lives, and sometimes dies. This also explains why the deep universe does not appear to us as a single consistent present. It cannot. Imagine trying to construct a real-time map of a country when reports from nearby towns take minutes to arrive. Reports from distant cities take years. And reports from the far frontier take centuries or millennia. The map would not be wrong, exactly, but it would be stitched together from different moments. That is what every cosmic map is. We are building our picture of the universe from non-simultaneous evidence, from arrivals spread across vast gulfs of travel time. And yet, this does not make astronomy vague or untrustworthy. In some ways, it makes it more profound. We are not being deceived by the universe. We are being shown its structure. The delay is not an obstacle added afterward. It is part of what space is. A light year is not a technical inconvenience. It is the shape of separation under a speed limit. There is a tendency, when people first encounter this, to think the main lesson is simply that space is huge. That is true, but it is not deep enough. Huge is what mountains are. Huge is what oceans are. Even huge deserts and ice sheets remain in the same broad human category of traversable reality. A light year teaches something harsher. It teaches that the universe is not arranged around our timing. Our whole nervous system is built on rapid feedback. You touch a surface, and it answers your skin immediately. You speak, and someone answers while your emotional state still fits the question. You move, and the world responds within a window your body can use. Space beyond a certain scale abandons that arrangement completely. This has consequences not only for travel and communication, but for the meaning of events. Suppose a star many thousands of light years away exploded in a supernova. The event itself would happen there, in its own local reality, at whatever moment physics required. But whether it belonged to our sky this year, or next century, or 100 centuries from now, would depend entirely on the distance. The universe does not present its happenings according to any global schedule we can inhabit. Things occur where they occur. We receive them when the light arrives. That makes now a provincial idea. We need it. Daily life would collapse without it. There is nothing wrong with the ordinary present. It is one of the most useful illusions we have, but it is still local. On Earth, within human scales, now works beautifully. Across interstellar and intergalactic space, now becomes less like a universal frame, and more like a neighborhood condition. There is a now for here. There is a different now for there. Light years are the cracks between those local presents. The brain resists this for understandable reasons. We are social animals. We evolved in bands, landscapes, seasons, and cycles that rewarded immediacy. Notice the movement, hear the warning, see the face, read the weather, track the herd. There was no evolutionary pressure to intuit what it means for a galaxy 2.5 million light years away to be visible in your sky as a pre-human memory. Our minds were shaped to survive local truth, not cosmic truth. The extraordinary part is not that we fail to feel these scales naturally. The extraordinary part is that we can learn to think them anyway. And once we do, a change begins. The sky starts to separate into layers of honesty. Nearby things remain relatively recent. Distant things become historical. The universe does not flatten into one grand image anymore. It deepens. A star is no longer just a star. It is a delayed state. A galaxy is no longer just a system. It is a report from an earlier epoch. Looking out becomes less like sightseeing and more like listening to voices that left long before we arrived. At first, that can feel almost lonely. We are surrounded by light that cannot meet us in real time. We live in a universe where presence is mostly local, and almost everything beyond our immediate region reaches us late. But loneliness is not the final feeling here. There is another turn still waiting, because once we accept that even nearby galaxies come to us from ancient moments, the obvious question is how far this can go. If light can cross millions of years to reach us, what happens at billions? Does the logic simply continue in a clean line, farther and older, until the whole universe lies open as an ancient archive? Or is there some deeper limit beyond which even light, patient as it is, has not had enough time to arrive? That is where the idea of the observable universe enters, and it is one of those phrases that sounds technical while hiding a very human shock. It does not mean the whole universe, necessarily. It means the part from which light has had time to reach us since cosmic history began. Which is another way of saying that reality may extend beyond what any signal could have brought into view so far. There may be more. In fact, there almost certainly is. But the age of the universe and the finite speed of light together impose a horizon, not like a wall, but like a limit on what can have entered our experience at all. The light year, at that point, stops being a unit and starts feeling like destiny. A horizon on Earth is a simple thing. You stand by the sea or on an open plain, and there is a line beyond which the surface falls away from sight. You know the world continues past it. The horizon is not an ending. It is a limit created by position. Walk farther, climb higher, and the line moves. It feels gentle, even familiar. The cosmic version is harder to live with because it is made not by terrain, but by time. The observable universe is not the whole universe, neatly framed for us. It is the region from which light has had enough time to arrive, since the universe became transparent enough for light to travel freely. We do not call it observable because we are lazy or under-equipped. We call it observable because the finite age of cosmic history and the finite speed of light impose a real limit on what can have reached us. That idea sounds clean. The feeling of it is stranger. We are used to horizons that retreat when we move. Sail farther and more ocean appears. Fly higher and the earth opens beneath you. But the cosmic horizon is not something we can outrun with ordinary motion. It is tied to the history of the universe itself. There are regions so distant that their light has not had enough time to get here. Not because nothing is there, not because they are hidden by dust or darkness in the ordinary sense. Simply because the universe has not been around long enough for signals from those places to become part of our experience. So there is a way in which reality exceeds our witness by construction. This is one of the most humbling ideas in science, and it is best approached slowly. The universe is around 13.8 billion years old. A first rough intuition might then suggest that we should be able to see 13.8 billion light years in every direction. But the real picture is more subtle, because while light has been traveling, space itself has been expanding. The galaxies whose ancient light reaches us now are not still sitting at the simple distance they were when that light began its journey. The stage itself has been stretching while the signal crossed it. That stretching can easily be misimagined. It is tempting to think of galaxies as if they were bullets moving through empty static space. At small local scales, motion through space is exactly the right language. But on the largest scales, cosmic expansion is not best understood as all galaxies simply flying outward through a pre-existing emptiness, the way sparks fly from a firework. The distances between vast regions of space grow. The geometry itself evolves. And that means the relation between light travel time and present-day distance becomes more complicated than our everyday minds want it to be. Complicated does not have to mean inaccessible, though. We can hold the main consequence without drowning in detail. The observable universe is much wider than 13.8 billion light-years across. In current cosmology, the radius of the observable universe is on the order of 46 billion light-years. Not because light broke the speed limit, but because the space through which that light traveled expanded over cosmic time. This is another point where the brain wants to revolt. We finally begin accepting that a light-year is a distance. We begin accepting that seeing far means seeing old. Then the universe adds one more correction. Even old light does not move across a stage that remains still for our convenience. The scale is not merely large, the scale is alive. And once that lands, even the phrase edge of the universe needs to be handled with care. The observable universe has a boundary in terms of what can be seen from here, from now, given the age of the cosmos and the speed of light. That does not mean there is a physical wall, or a rim, or a place where existence abruptly stops. It means there is a limit to the portion of the universe whose signals have entered our past light cone, to use the more technical language. Beyond that, there may be vastly more reality. We simply have not received it. This should feel eerie, because it is. There may be regions of the cosmos forever outside direct contact with us, not because they are mystical, but because the history of expansion and the finite speed of information may never allow mutual exchange. Entire galaxies, perhaps endless reaches beyond them, could exist in the same broad universe and yet remain permanently absent from anything we could observe or influence. The light year becomes, here, a measure not only of faraway things, but of separation so deep that elsewhere starts to mean outside any shared story. To feel the force of that, it helps to return to the body for a moment. Think about how much of your life depends on the speed of feedback. Balance depends on rapid correction. Conversation depends on short delay. Driving a car depends on response times narrow enough for muscle, eye, and judgment to function as one coordinated system. Human life is stitched together by immediacy. Remove that immediacy, and basic forms of coherence begin to fray. Now enlarge the canvas. In cosmic terms, feedback fails almost immediately. By the time you have reached the moon, dialogue is altered. By the time you reach Mars, depending on where it is in its orbit, radio delay can stretch from several minutes to over 20 minutes one way. By the time you imagine another star, the category of response has changed entirely. At galactic scales, coordination becomes civilizationally absurd. At cosmological scales, contact may be impossible in principle. This is what the title is really pointing toward. A light year breaks our brains because brains are prediction machines built for local loops. We are designed to live in a world where cause and visible effect remain close enough to bind experience together. Space on larger scales loosens those bindings until the very notions of conversation, travel, shared present, and common horizon begin to fail. And yet there is a further strangeness hidden inside that failure, because the deepest light we can see does not come to us from stars or galaxies in the familiar sense. It comes from the cosmic microwave background, a faint bath of radiation, reaching us from a time when the universe was only about 380,000 years old, when it had cooled enough for light to travel relatively freely through space. Before that, the universe was too hot and dense for light to move unimpeded in the way it later would. It was not dark in the ordinary sense. It was opaque. When we detect that ancient afterglow, we are not looking at objects in the way we look at stars. We are receiving a kind of surviving weather from the early universe itself, stretched over billions of years by cosmic expansion, until it arrives now as microwave radiation. This is one of the most extraordinary things science has ever found. The universe kept a record of its early conditions in light, and that record is still arriving. There is something almost tender in that, not sentimental, just strange and exact. The cosmos did not owe us this readability. It did not have to preserve traces that minds like ours could uncover. And yet here we are, on a small, rocky planet, around an ordinary star, able to build instruments delicate enough to register radiation that began its journey when the universe was in its infancy. By this point, the light year has outgrown its first impression completely. It is not just a giant ruler for stars. It is a clue to how reality is structured. It tells us that distance is delay, that observation is historical, that the present is local, that the universe has a horizon defined by time and travel, and that even our best maps are assembled from light that did not leave all at once. The older picture of space, the naive one, imagined a giant room. Bigger than Earth, yes. Bigger than imagination, maybe. But still basically room-like. Put objects in it. Measure how far apart they are. Dream about crossing from one to another. The true picture is quieter and less forgiving. Space is not a room on a bigger scale. It is a domain where separation changes the nature of experience itself. And once we accept that at cosmological distance, another question begins to press against the mind with unusual force. If the universe is built this way, if every deep look is also a look back in time, then what we call the visible cosmos is not a snapshot of one moment. It is something more like a layered excavation. Near things appear in relative freshness. Far things arrive from progressively earlier epochs. The deepest light is the oldest visible light of all, which means the universe, as seen from Earth, is not just wide. It is stratified time made visible. That layered structure is easy to miss because our eyes flatten everything into the same bowl of night. A bright planet, a nearby star, a distant nebula, another galaxy. The ancient background glow of the early universe discovered only through instruments. All of it gets folded into the same visual category, things in the sky. But the sky is not a single surface. It is more like a stack of arrival times, compressed into one field of view. When we look outward, we are not seeing one moment spread across distance. We are seeing many moments, all reaching us together. It is a remarkable arrangement. Nearby objects speak in relatively recent light. Farther objects speak in older light. Push outward far enough, and you are not just seeing remote matter, but remote eras. The universe reveals itself to us not all at once, but in layers of age. That means astronomy, unlike almost any ordinary human activity, allows us to look across vast distances and thereby reconstruct something like a history of reality itself. This is why deep space observation is so powerful. It does not merely tell us what is out there, it tells us what used to be out there. And from enough examples at enough distances, those old views begin to show pattern. Younger galaxies nearby often look more mature. Farther galaxies, seen at earlier stages of cosmic history, can look messier, more compact, more actively star-forming, less settled. The deeper we look, the more the universe begins to reveal earlier chapters of its own development. We are not standing outside time watching this. We are inside one late chapter, receiving earlier ones as light arrives. And that makes the universe feel much less like a static structure and much more like a process. The stars above are not pieces pinned permanently into place. Galaxies grow, collide, distort, consume gas, form new stars, lose old ones, change shape over immense spans. Black holes feed, suns ignite, suns die. The sky only seems still because the great motions unfold across timescales far beyond the pace at which a human life notices change. Light years are part of that trick. They keep the process visible, but only through delay. There is a quiet irony in this. The farther away something is, the less current our information becomes, but also, sometimes, the more historically important it is. If you want to understand what the universe looked like early on, you do not look nearby. You look deep. You accept dimmer light, older light, more patient evidence. In that sense, distance is not just a barrier, it is also an archive. The same light year that blocks immediacy creates access to the past. That double meaning matters. Otherwise, the story becomes too bleak, too dominated by separation alone. Yes, light years isolate. Yes, they destroy the hope that the cosmos is a place of easy presence. But they also make memory physical. They preserve history in transit. The universe is not only difficult to cross, it is strangely generous in how much of its past it leaves available to beings who can learn how to read delayed light. Even so, the practical violence of scale never really eases. It only becomes more intelligible. Think again about human travel, not to reduce the cosmos to a travel problem, but because movement is one of the ways we instinctively measure what is real. On Earth, a long journey can define a season, maybe a year, maybe the whole arc of a migration or expedition. Across the oceans in earlier centuries, a voyage could shape dynasties, economies, empires. Distance felt formidable then, dangerous, transformative. Yet all of it remained inside a world where a person could still imagine setting out and arriving within one life. A single light year ends that assumption for almost every technology we possess. At speeds achieved by our current spacecraft, a light year is not just far, it is civilizationally long. 4 light years is not a mission, it is an inheritance problem. It forces questions that no ordinary journey forces. Who maintains the purpose? Who remembers the destination? What happens if the society that launched the craft disappears? How does meaning survive across durations longer than institutions usually do? Distance starts converting engineering into anthropology. This is why so much speculative thought about interstellar travel ends up drifting toward generation ships, suspended crews, automated probes, or extremely small robotic missions, pushed by ideas we have not yet fully mastered. The point is not that these concepts are impossible or inevitable. The point is that light years compel them. Once the scale becomes honest, ordinary travel categories collapse. A voyage between stars is not a longer version of an airplane flight. It belongs to a different realm of planning, endurance, and identity. Even communication gets transfigured. We tend to imagine information as the thing that escapes physical constraints most easily, because in daily life, it almost does. Send a file, make a call, stream a live image from across the planet. We have built a human world in which information moves so quickly that delay often feels like malfunction. But in space, information is not exempt. It is chained to the same speed limit as everything else. That means every distant system is not merely far from our bodies. It is far from our awareness. Suppose, only as an illustration, there were a habitable world around a star 50 light years away, with observers looking back at us. What could they know about Earth at this moment? Nothing of this moment. They would be receiving Earth as it was 50 years ago. If they sent a signal in response to something they observed then, and we received it now, it would already be a reply to a past version of us. Any true exchange would be staggered across generations. One side would always be learning about the other, long after the relevant moment had passed. The implications of that go beyond astronomy. They reach into the meaning of coexistence. We often imagine the universe as a shared stage on which possible civilizations might arise. But a stage suggests common time. Light years break common time. They do not make coexistence impossible in the broad sense. They make simultaneity elusive. Two cultures could exist at once in the same galaxy, and still know each other only as delayed impressions, each seeing the other through an old window. That is one reason the word now becomes so unstable once the scale widens. It still works locally. Here on Earth, it remains indispensable. But cosmic now is not something we can observe directly in any global way. There is no universal live feed. There is only what has had time to arrive. And yet our minds keep trying to smuggle in a simple present. We ask what a star is doing now, what a galaxy looks like now, what exists beyond the observable horizon now. These are reasonable questions, but they need a kind of intellectual gentleness. The answers, where we can infer them, depend on physical models, not direct simultaneous sight. We can know a great deal. We can estimate, calculate, simulate, and test. But the old human dream of just seeing what is there right now, everywhere at once, does not survive contact with the light year. Perhaps that is why the concept leaves such a residue when it truly lands. It is not just big, many things are big. It is not just scientific, many facts are scientific. A light year carries a deeper correction. It tells us that the world we evolved to navigate is only a narrow band of the possible, a local pocket where distance is small enough and signals fast enough that reality feels immediate. Beyond that band, the universe is still perfectly lawful, perfectly real, but less and less compatible with instinct. We should not treat that as failure. It is a revelation of scale. Fish are not defective because they do not understand mountains. We are not defective because our bodies were not built to feel 1,000 light years. What is extraordinary is that we can bridge the gap at all, that a primate nervous system shaped for trees, weather, faces, hunger, and shelter can still build mathematics, telescopes, radio dishes, and theories powerful enough to let the impossible become thinkable. That does not mean fully feelable. Feeling lags behind understanding. It probably always will. And maybe that is why the light year remains so potent. It is one of those rare ideas where knowledge does not completely tame mystery. You can know the definition. You can memorize the number. You can repeat that it is about 9.46 trillion kilometers. All of that can be true, and the concept can still remain partly wild, because what it really measures is not only a distance, but a mismatch between the universe and the scales for which we were built. The farther we go, the clearer that mismatch becomes. The solar system stopped being cozy. The nearest stars became lonely islands. The Milky Way became too wide for a shared present. Other galaxies became visible memories from before us. The observable universe became a horizon defined by time itself. And still another realization waits inside all this, quieter than the others, but perhaps more intimate. The night sky is not simply full of objects beyond our reach. It is full of ancient arrivals that nevertheless reach us. Across all that emptiness, through all that time, reality still becomes visible here. That is not a solution to the distance. It is something stranger. It means that even in a universe too large for our bodies, our minds are not completely shut out. Not completely shut out does not mean comfortable. It means admitted, barely, under conditions we did not choose. The universe does not open itself to us in the form of easy contact or human-scale access. It opens itself through traces, delays, radiation, mathematics, and patient interpretation. We do not stand at the center receiving a live performance. We stand very far from most things, very late to almost everything, gathering what has survived the journey. There is something honest in that arrangement. A more indulgent cosmos might have been easier to admire, but less interesting to understand. The real one makes us work. It withholds immediacy, and in doing so it forces a deeper kind of attention. We do not simply see, we infer, we compare. We build chains of evidence out of old light. We learn to treat a photon not as a spark, but as a messenger carrying a timestamp. That word, messenger, is worth keeping for a moment, because it helps recover the physical tenderness hidden inside abstraction. Light is not a vague glow, filling space for our convenience. It is an actual process, actual electromagnetic radiation, moving through vacuum, covering distance at a finite speed, arriving with information encoded in wavelength, intensity, direction, structure. When astronomers spread light into spectra, examine shifts, measure brightness changes, or trace faint background patterns, they are not decorating data. They are reading messages the universe has been sending across vast emptiness. And messages can be old without being useless. Sometimes, age is the whole point. A nearby star can tell us about the local present of stellar behavior, relatively speaking. A far-off galaxy can tell us how galaxies behaved when the universe was young. The cosmic microwave background can tell us about conditions unimaginably early, preserved in a form no human sense could have discovered unaided. The deeper the delay, the deeper the history. So the light year, which first appears as a barrier, slowly reveals itself as a recording medium. Space keeps history because light takes time. That also means the cosmos is not merely larger than instinct, it is richer than instinct. Our first response to scale is often emotional shrinkage. We hear the numbers and feel dismissed. Human life seems local, brief, almost incidental. There is truth in that response, but only part of the truth. Because the same universe that makes us small also allows small beings to detect its earliest visible glow, to estimate its age, to map the structure of its galaxy, to identify planets around other stars, and to understand why distance becomes delay at all. Small is not the same as excluded. This matters because people often slide too quickly from cosmic scale into cosmic nihilism, as if the only possible feeling before immensity is irrelevance. But a light year suggests something more precise. It tells us our instincts are local, our bodies are limited, our lives are brief, and our direct reach is tiny. All true. Yet it also tells us that understanding can exceed the scale of bodily experience. We cannot cross the galaxy. We may never reach another star in any ordinary human way. But we can know enough to stop mistaking the universe for a version of home designed around us. Knowledge here is not domination, it is calibration. To feel that more clearly, it helps to return once more to the ordinary world. In daily life, we live inside feedback loops, so tight we forget they are loops at all. Open a door and it moves immediately. Call a name and someone turns. Sunlight brightens a wall. A car brakes. A kettle whistles. The world seems knit together by direct response. Even when systems become large, cities, markets, nations, climate, the delays are still small enough that we can often pretend the whole structure is one coherent present. Space tears that pretense gently but completely. Across light years, the unity of the present comes apart. Cause and observation separate. Action and reply separate. Existence and appearance separate. What is there and what is seen are no longer the same moment. That is why the concept keeps unfolding as we sit with it. At first it sounds like a large distance. Then it becomes a communication delay, then a travel problem, then a historical filter, then an attack on simultaneity itself. Every layer is still the same concept. We are simply moving closer to what it was always telling us. This is also why the phrase, just a unit of distance, turns out to be too small. It is correct, technically, but it is emotionally misleading. A meter is a unit of distance. A mile is a unit of distance. A light year is a unit of distance that carries with it a built-in philosophy of observation. It cannot be understood in a satisfying way without confronting the speed of light, the age of signals, and the fact that far enough away means long enough ago. And perhaps that is the real break in the brain, not the size alone, the loss of an absolute now. We do not notice how dependent we are on shared present until it starts to disappear. Most human meaning depends on overlap. To speak is to expect reception soon enough that the relationship between thought and response remains alive. To travel is to expect the place arrived at to still belong to the world departed. To witness is to expect that what is seen is, roughly, happening. The farther outward we go, the less the universe guarantees any of that. A light year is a measurable amount of distance, yes, but it is also a measurable erosion of overlap. Even the stars nearest to us are already teaching this. Proxima Centauri is not much more than 4 light years away, and already a conversation becomes an 8.5-year loop at minimum. A world around that star, if any observers were there watching Earth, would know us only through delayed evidence. They would not see tonight. They would see 4-year-old Earth, and we would see them the same way. Each side would exist partly in the other's past. That is not a special case. That is what space does. Expand outward, and the effect becomes almost poetic in its severity. The galaxy is a structure whose parts cannot all participate in one present. The local group of galaxies, our small galactic gathering, is not a neighborhood of contemporaneous sight, but a web of old views. Beyond that, clusters and superclusters recede into even older layers. The visible universe becomes a museum that is not curated for us, only revealed to us by travel time. Every direction is full of time stacked by distance. No animal intuition was built for that. Yet once you begin to understand it, the reward is unusual. The sky no longer feels like a ceiling. It no longer feels like a wallpaper of lights. It becomes depth. Not just spatial depth, but temporal depth. It becomes one of the very few places where your eyes, helped by tools and thought, can participate in history on scales otherwise inaccessible to any creature. That participation is partial, and that is part of its dignity. We do not get everything. We do not get the whole universe. We do not even get the whole present of our own galaxy. We get what arrives. But what arrives is enough to rebuild astonishing truths. This is one of the reasons modern cosmology can feel so emotionally different from ancient skywatching, while still being continuous with it. Ancient people looked up and found pattern, season, omen, order, navigation, myth. We look up and still find pattern, but also recession velocities, stellar evolution, galactic structure, background radiation, planetary transits, gravitational lenses, chemical fingerprints in light. The sky has not lost intimacy by becoming scientific. It has gained more kinds of intimacy. It is now intimate not because it feels close, but because we have learned how much is hidden in what reaches us. The light year sits at the center of that transformation. Without it, or rather without what it implies, the sky remains decorative. With it, the sky becomes truthful. And truth here does not flatten wonder. It sharpens it. There is a greater wonder in knowing that sunlight is 8 minutes old than in vaguely calling the sun magnificent. There is a greater wonder in knowing Andromeda appears to us from before human civilization than in simply labeling it beautiful. There is a greater wonder in realizing the cosmic microwave background is ancient afterglow still arriving than in saying the universe is mysterious. Precision, when it is real precision, does not drain feeling. It gives feeling edges. This matters for another reason, too. The universe is often presented in two unhelpful tones, either as a pile of dry technical facts that do not touch the emotions at all, or as a flood of grand language untethered from any real understanding. Both miss the point. The light year rescues us from both mistakes. It is exact and destabilizing at the same time. It is a defined quantity that carries existential consequences. It is math that becomes atmosphere, physics that becomes perspective. And perspective, once changed, does not always change back. After a certain point, you can still go on living ordinary life, of course. You still answer messages, wash dishes, stand in line, wait for the bus, make plans for next week. But some quiet layer of the mind remains altered. The next time you look at the moon, you may feel that 1.3-second delay. The next time sunlight warms your arm through a window, you may remember that it began this part of its journey more than 8 minutes ago. The next time you see a bright winter constellation, you may sense that the pattern is not a flat arrangement, but a misleading projection across different depths and times. And those are only the first changes. Because once the local sky starts to feel historical, a larger intuition begins to form. Everything beyond immediate earthly life is arriving late, not ruined by lateness, defined by it. The stars, the galaxy, Andromeda, the ancient cosmic glow, all of it comes to us by patience. The universe is not a place that appears instantly. It is a place that reaches us over time. That is the deeper character, hidden inside the light year. And when we follow that character all the way outward, another gentle shock begins to emerge. The question is no longer only how far things are. The question becomes how different reality must be from the version our nervous systems first assumed. Because our nervous systems did assume a version of reality. They had to. Evolution does not produce creatures that understand the universe in general. It produces creatures that can survive a specific neighborhood. Our neighborhood was not empty interstellar space. It was ground, weather, hunger, other minds, movement in the grass, the changing light of day, the memory of water, the meaning of a face. The scales that mattered were meters, not light years, seconds, not millennia. The useful world was compact, immediate, full of consequences that arrived fast enough to shape behavior. That inheritance still lives in us. It is there every time we think of distance as something that should be crossable, every time we assume that what we see is happening now, every time we imagine a map as a picture of simultaneous reality. Those assumptions are not foolish. They are exquisitely adapted to Earth. They are just not universal. A light year is one of the clearest demonstrations that local truth and cosmic truth are not the same thing. What makes that especially striking is that the local truth is not replaced by some colder truth. It is nested inside it, The room is still real. The street is still real. The continent, the ocean, the planet, all real. Human distance is not fake because cosmic distance exists. It is simply partial. The world that fits our bodies is a valid province of a larger order that does not care whether our instincts remain comfortable inside it. There's a certain maturity in accepting that. We often want reality to become more human as we understand it, as if the final reward of knowledge should be reassurance. Sometimes knowledge does reassure. Often it does not. Sometimes it simply clarifies the terms under which we exist. The light year is clarifying in that exact way. It tells us the universe is not built out of shared immediacy. It is built out of finite speeds, expanding space, delayed information, and local pockets of temporary coherence. That phrase, temporary coherence, may sound severe, but it points to something beautiful as well. Think about Earth again. Here, in this narrow band of conditions, signals are fast enough and scales are small enough that life can build dense layers of interaction. Forests, oceans, nervous systems, families, languages, cities, science, memory, love, grief, politics, music, agriculture, all of it depends on a world where feedback can hold together. That kind of coherence is not guaranteed everywhere. In the broader universe, light years keep most regions apart. On Earth, in a tiny zone around one star, the distances are mercifully short. The local present holds long enough for complexity to bloom. So the light year does not only show us what is too far, it also reveals, by contrast, how extraordinary the near really is. We rarely feel that because we are adapted to it. Fish do not gasp in astonishment that water surrounds them. We do not wake each morning overwhelmed by the miracle of near enough sunlight, near enough atmosphere, near enough chemistry, near enough feedback. Normality hides contingency. It makes usable conditions feel inevitable. Yet from the perspective opened by the light year, even daily life begins to look less automatic. A world where response times are short enough for conversation, touch, and memory to weave into one continuous human present is not the default scale of reality. It is a local privilege. This is one reason cosmic perspective can deepen ordinary feeling rather than dissolving it. The common fear is that astronomy makes human life seem small and therefore trivial. But scale is not the only source of meaning. Sometimes fragility is. Sometimes rarity is. Sometimes the fact that something exists only in a narrow range of conditions makes it more vivid, not less. A human conversation across a table may be microscopic compared with a galaxy. But galaxies do not have conversations across tables. They do not raise children, hesitate before a confession, or remember a voice from 10 years ago. Vastness is not a substitute for intimacy. The point is not to pit the human against the cosmic. The point is to see them more honestly. Light years humble the body. They do not nullify experience. They show us that most of the universe lies outside our direct scale, and that within that fact, the small region where thought, language, and witness have appeared becomes more, not less, astonishing. Still, the light year keeps pulling us back outward, because once the emotional meaning settles, the physical meaning continues unfolding. We have talked about delay as if it were mainly an issue of communication and perception, which it is, but it also quietly changes how we imagine cause itself. On Earth, we often think in chains that remain visibly connected. A storm builds, the sky darkens, rain falls, rivers swell, an action happens, and its effects arrive on a timescale we can mentally bind together. In cosmic settings, those chains can stretch beyond direct intuition. A star begins to exhaust its fuel. Internal balances shift. Outer layers change. Light leaves. Millions of years later, the message reaches a planet around another star. A galaxy distorts under gravity. Mergers begin. Star formation rises. Enormous structures evolve. And the evidence drifts across intergalactic space toward observers who will piece the event together long after its local phase has passed. Even the early universe, with its hot, dense beginnings, left marks whose full significance would not be understood until billions of years later, by minds not yet imagined when the light began. Cause is still cause. Physics does not become mystical at large scales, but our encounter with cause becomes delayed, distributed, historical. By the time we receive the evidence, the event may be old beyond any human category of old. We do not watch the universe in real time. We reconstruct it from aftermath and transit. That is one reason scientific humility matters so much in astronomy. Not because we know little, though there is always more to learn, but because the thing we are studying never comes to us in one clean, simultaneous package. We have to separate evidence from interpretation carefully. We have to model what cannot be seen directly in the present tense. We have to acknowledge uncertainty where the signal is partial, faint, or filtered through complicated processes. The Oort cloud, for example, is not a brightly photographed shell sitting at the edge of a textbook. It is a strongly supported theoretical structure, inferred from the behavior of long-period comets and gravitational dynamics. Dark matter is not directly seen as an object. Its effects are traced through motion, structure, lensing, and consistency across observations. The early universe is not recalled from memory. It is inferred from radiation and the deep coherence of physics. Far from weakening the wonder, this makes it more adult. The universe is not a fairy tale that yields its secrets in one glance. It is a patient reality that rewards disciplined attention. And that patience is, in a way, built into the light year itself. The unit forces slowness upon thought. You cannot really rush it. You can memorize the figure and move on, but the meaning does not arrive at the same speed as the definition. First you hear that a light year is the distance light travels in a year. Then you hear how fast light is. Then you notice the moon, the sun, Mars, Pluto, Proxima, the width of the galaxy, Andromeda, the cosmic horizon. Each step feels manageable by itself. The mind keeps saying yes, yes, I follow. Only later does the full consequence gather. By then the concept has already moved inside your view of reality and begun rearranging it. That slow rearrangement may be the most important effect of all. The brain is not broken in the sense of failure. It is broken in the sense of being forced out of an old shape. The title sounds dramatic, but the real drama is quiet. A light year does not shatter thought with one spectacular blow. It applies steady pressure until familiar categories stop fitting. Near and far, now and then, seeing and knowing, home and elsewhere. One by one, they become less simple. And as they do, the universe starts to feel less like scenery and more like structure. Not a backdrop for human meaning, but a reality with its own scale, timing, and indifference, within which human meaning nevertheless appears. That paradox is easy to say badly. Done badly, it sounds like either sentiment or despair. Done honestly, it feels more exact than either. We are not the center. We are not outside at all either. We are local beings who have learned how to read ancient light. There is immense dignity in that sentence when it is earned. Because ancient light is what the sky mostly is. Not old in the metaphorical sense, old literally, delayed literally. The stars above are not contemporary decorations. They are arrivals from different distances and therefore different times. Some are recent enough, by cosmic standards, that the delay barely changes their meaning. Others are so remote that what we see belongs to chapters of the universe long closed where they are. The sky is a mixture of relative freshness and deep history layered into one field. Once you really know that, even darkness changes. The dark between stars is no longer empty in the naive sense. It is travel time. It is the interval through which light moves, and during which sources continue living whatever comes next. The blackness is not just absence. It is duration made invisible. And that invisible duration may be one of the hardest things to picture honestly. We are good at picturing objects. We can imagine a planet, a star, a spiral galaxy, even if the scales resist us. What we are much worse at imagining is the interval itself, the enormous, silent, contentless stretch between source and observer. A light year is mostly not a thing. It is mostly emptiness crossed by a signal. It is a measure of how long even light must remain in transit before one place can become visible to another. That has a peculiar emotional effect. It makes the universe feel both crowded and lonely at once. Crowded because there are stars beyond counting, galaxies beyond counting, structures at every level we can detect. Lonely because almost all of them are separated by expanses so severe that their coexistence does not become companionship. Abundance is not closeness. The sky is full, but not intimate in the way a forest is intimate, or a city at night, or a room where voices overlap. And yet the room matters here, because that is where our expectations were formed. In a room, the other side is available. Across a field, the other side is still available. Across a mountain range, an ocean, even a hemisphere, availability can be restored with enough effort. Human history is full of those restored availabilities. Roads, ships, radio, fiber optics, aircraft, satellites. Again and again, we have taken what was once remote and made it practically near. That success teaches a dangerous lesson if we carry it too far outward. It teaches us to think that every distance is just a temporary engineering problem. A light year is where that confidence begins to fail, for reasons deeper than funding, machines, or will. It is important not to turn that into defeatist theater. Human beings have surprised themselves before. New propulsion methods may come. Small interstellar probes may one day be launched. Generation-scale missions may be imagined seriously. But even the boldest ideas do not change the underlying point. The scale is not one more step along the path from horse to ship to plane to rocket. It is a rupture in category. The universe is telling us, very calmly, that beyond certain thresholds, distance changes the type of relation possible between places. This can be seen even inside our own era of space exploration. Mars is often spoken of as the next frontier, and in many ways it is. Yet the delay between Earth and Mars already changes the psychology of operation. Commands are not immediate. Support is not immediate. Rescue is not immediate. The moment delay enters, autonomy becomes necessary. Judgment has to move closer to the point of action, because central control can no longer keep pace. Increase the distance further, and this becomes not merely operational, but civilizational. Worlds separated by light years would not share one control room, one synchronized politics, one immediate moral atmosphere. They would diverge because the universe would force them to. That matters because it means light years do not just separate objects. They separate cultures, futures, consequences, and memory. If a colony around another star existed, its practical independence would not begin with a declaration. It would begin with delay. No order from Earth could arrive in time to govern daily reality there. No crisis there could be answered here in a useful present tense. Distance would write autonomy into the structure long before ideology did. Even without imagining other worlds, we can feel the lesson in our own species. The larger a system becomes, the more delay matters. In empires, slow communication shaped the outer limits of control. In markets, information lag creates instability and advantage. In military history, delayed orders and outdated maps have changed battles and borders. Everywhere scale grows, delay begins to govern behavior. Light years are simply delay at the scale where human intuitions about coordination are no longer even approximately adequate. This is one reason the phrase, "space is big," always feels too weak. It is true, but it says almost nothing. Big could still mean manageable by larger versions of ourselves. Big could still mean a giant territory. The truth conveyed by the light year is sharper. Space is not just big, space is delay-rich. It is structured in such a way that separation alters what kinds of unity are possible at all. And when we take that seriously, the Milky Way changes character once more. Earlier, it became too wide for a shared present. Now it becomes too wide for a single-lived society in any ordinary sense. We can imagine networks, yes. We can imagine waves of expansion, scattered communities, ancient signals crossing between stars. But the fantasy of a galaxy behaving like one nation, one city, one responsive organism, that begins to look less plausible the more honestly we respect light-speed delay. The galaxy is less like a kingdom, and more like an archipelago of epochs. The same logic reaches downward as well as outward. Our own perception of Earth depends on short delay. The reason humanity can imagine itself, however imperfectly, as one species on one planet is partly technological. But technology works because the planet is small enough for rapid signal travel. Earth, in cosmic terms, is intimate. Light circles it many times in a second. That fact hides beneath everything modern. It is the quiet physical gift behind real-time coordination. Global observation, shared broadcasts, synchronized systems. Without such short delays, even earthly civilization would feel much more fragmented. So when the light year makes human life look small, it also clarifies why human life feels as coherent as it does. Coherence is local. Locality is precious. That may be one of the most useful emotional corrections in all of this. Cosmic perspective does not only enlarge the far, it rehabilitates the near. It teaches us not to take immediacy for granted, A face across a table is an event of almost miraculous closeness in a universe mostly built out of separation. A voice answered in the same second belongs to a very special scale. The warmth of sunlight arriving after only 8 minutes begins to seem almost merciful. We are used to thinking of the sun as far away, and of course it is. Yet compared with the stars, 8 minutes is a kind of nearness so profound it shapes the whole biosphere. The same applies to the moon. A 1.3-second delay is long enough to notice in a radio exchange, short enough that it still feels like relation. The moon remains in our emotional world, partly because it has not yet crossed the line into pure historical distance. It is remote, but not alien in time. That is why lunar missions still feel like extensions of humanity, rather than messages thrown into an abyss. The moon is close enough that action and reply still belong to one lived story. Proxima Centauri does not. Andromeda certainly does not. Once that distinction becomes emotional, rather than merely factual, the title stops sounding exaggerated. The light year really does break the brain, because the brain wants one universe made of the same type of distance all the way through. It wants a smooth scaling up from room to street, to city, to country, to planet, to star, to galaxy, each level differing only in size. But the structure is not smooth. There are cliffs in intuitiveness. The jump from Earth to Moon is one kind of change. Moon to Sun is another. Solar system to nearest star is a much harsher one. Star to galaxy, harsher still. Galaxy to cosmic horizon, harsher again. The universe is not just bigger at each step, it becomes differently comprehensible. This is why the same facts can continue paying off long after the first explanation. You hear that the nearest star is 4.24 light-years away, and perhaps that is merely interesting. Later it becomes unsettling because you understand the communication lag. Later still it becomes emotionally severe because you understand the travel implications. Later still it becomes philosophical because you realize it means there is no shared present between star systems in the everyday sense. The fact does not change, your relation to it does. That kind of deepening is rare in ordinary knowledge. Many facts become less interesting once understood. A light year tends to do the opposite. The definition is the least interesting part. The consequences keep opening. One consequence we have not stayed with long enough is the effect on certainty. If every distant observation is delayed, then the farther outward we go, the more our knowledge of current states depends on the reliability of physical law across time and space. We see a star as it was. We use models of stellar evolution to infer what it is likely like now. We observe galaxies at different distances and infer developmental trends across cosmic history. We detect ancient radiation and infer conditions in the early universe. This is not guesswork. It is disciplined inference built on extraordinary consistency in physical behavior. But the distinction matters. We are not omniscient witnesses. We are readers of evidence. There is a quiet nobility in that, too. We do not get to know the universe by standing outside it with a perfect overview. We know it from inside, from one location, one epoch, under the constraints of light travel, finite instruments, and local perspective. The miracle is not that our knowledge is incomplete. The miracle is that it works so well at all. And perhaps that is why the night sky feels different after enough time with this idea. Not merely larger, not merely older, but more exact in its strangeness. Those stars are not just shining, they are arriving. The galaxies are not just distant, they are delayed. The darkness between them is not just emptiness, it is time in transit. And the next realization, once that has settled, is almost impossible to avoid. If what reaches us is always old, then every act of cosmic seeing is also an act of mourning for a present we can never directly touch. Mourning may sound too heavy at first, but it points towards something real. Not grief in the sentimental sense, not tragedy, something quieter. Every time we look far away, we are accepting that what we receive is not the thing in its current state, but the thing as distance allowed it to be known. We never meet the distant universe in person. We meet its old light. That is the condition of the relationship. There is beauty in that, but also a soft, permanent loss folded into it. The present of distant reality is always withheld. We do not usually phrase it like that because astronomy is full of discoveries, and discoveries feel triumphant. New exoplanets, new galaxies, new maps of cosmic structure, new refinements in age, mass, composition, motion. The tone of science is often necessarily constructive. It tells us what we have learned. But hidden inside that progress is a truth with a different emotional color. The farther away anything is, the more the current state retreats from direct witness. We can infer it, sometimes very confidently, yet we cannot simply see it now. The light year makes absence part of knowledge. That absence matters because it pushes against one of our deepest habits, the habit of imagining perception as contact. On Earth, that habit is usually safe. To see a bird cross the yard is, for all practical purposes, to encounter the bird in the present. To watch someone turn toward you is to share a moment. The tiny delays carried by light are swallowed by the speed of ordinary life. Across cosmic distances, they are no longer swallowed. They become the story. Once that becomes intuitive, even our language about stars and galaxies starts to wobble slightly. We say a galaxy is colliding with another. We say a star is entering its red giant phase. We say a black hole sits at the center of a galaxy. These are sensible statements. They summarize real conditions as understood by physics. But our observational access to those realities is staggered. There is no one visual present in which all these things sit before us, ready to be described at once. The universe gives us evidence in layers. We do the work of assembling meaning. That work is one of the great human achievements. Not because it proves our importance in some cosmic hierarchy, but because it proves something subtler and perhaps more moving. A creature can be local without being trapped in local understanding. We emerged in a tiny environment of soil, weather, blood, and firelight, and yet we became capable of grasping that the stars overhead are time-stamped arrivals. That leap is astonishing precisely because it is not natural to us. It had to be earned against intuition. And intuition fights back, for good reason. Intuition wants a usable world. It wants one sky, one now, one straightforward meaning of distance. It wants to be able to say that something is there and mean present. The light year patiently removes those comforts, not all at once. First with the moon, then with the sun, then with the planets, then with the nearest stars, then with the galaxy, then with the observable universe. Each step asks for a little more surrender. What replaces those comforts is not chaos. It is a more disciplined wonder, the kind that survives contact with fact. That distinction matters because wonder is often treated as if it belongs only to vagueness, as if the only way to preserve awe is to keep things blurry. But the light year shows the opposite. Precision is what creates the deepest awe here. The fact that moonlight is delayed by about 1.3 seconds is more affecting than simply calling the moon mysterious. The fact that sunlight is already more than 8 minutes old when it reaches your skin is more powerful than calling the sun magnificent. The fact that Andromeda appears to us from 2.5 million years ago is more haunting than any generic phrase about cosmic grandeur. Exactness gives the feeling somewhere to land. It also protects the subject from performance. Without that protection, writing about space can become swollen very quickly. Everything becomes immense, unfathomable, mind-blowing, infinite, transcendent. The words inflate, the meaning thins. The light year resists that kind of inflation because it is stubbornly concrete. It asks a simple question over and over again. How long does light need? Every scale change follows from that. The strangeness is not a literary effect. It is the unavoidable result of a finite speed in a very large universe. And because the underlying rule is so simple, the consequences remain surprisingly clean, even when the scale becomes brutal. If something is 1 light year away, its light is 1 year old when it arrives. 10 light years away, 10 years old. 1,000, 1,000. The arithmetic is not the hard part. The hard part is letting the arithmetic alter the emotional architecture of reality. 1,000 light years means the sky can show us a star as it was when entire human institutions that feel ancient to us did not yet exist. 100,000 light years means the galaxy itself cannot be seen as one present thing. Millions of light years means other galaxies arrive from before us. Billions means deep cosmology becomes a study of earlier cosmic epochs. The rule never changed. We did. This is one reason scale in astronomy is so psychologically interesting. It is not merely cumulative, it is transformative. Add more distance on Earth and you mostly get inconvenience. Add more distance in space and eventually you get a different ontology of observation. You do not just get farther places, you get older versions of those places. Past a certain point, the meaning of seeing changes. That change can even make familiar science fiction dreams feel newly strange. Faster ships, galactic civilizations, messages from the stars, first contact, interstellar empires. All of these ideas rest, whether openly or not, on assumptions about how much delay minds and societies can absorb. Some remain possible in principle, some become harder under honest scale, but all are constrained by the same quiet rule. Light years are not backdrop. They are political, social, and emotional architecture. They determine how connected any far-flung world can really be. Imagine trying to sustain a shared culture across distances, where news arrives years late, where emergencies cannot be answered in the same generation that first perceived them, where local conditions force independent evolution of values, laws, technologies, and myths. Even if travel someday becomes faster than our present dreams allow, unless it outruns light itself, which current physics does not permit, the lag in information remains. And if travel does not outrun light, then history accumulates differently in each place. Each world becomes partly its own time zone of civilization, except the difference is not hours. It is years, decades, centuries, more. That helps reveal why the title lands so strongly once the layers are in place. A light year is the distance at which the brain starts losing its human assumptions about togetherness. Not all at once, not catastrophically, but steadily, unmistakably. Togetherness becomes correspondence. Presence becomes evidence. Travel becomes inheritance. Observation becomes archaeology. Even our metaphors start to strain. We call stars neighbors. We call galaxies local. We speak of the cosmic web as if structure implied intimacy. Yet structure does not imply intimacy. A skeleton has structure. A bureaucracy has structure. A forest root system has structure. The universe has structure too, but much of it is structure without immediacy, connection without nearness, coexistence without shared present. The web is real, so is the isolation between the nodes. Still, it would be wrong to leave the feeling there, as though the only lesson of the light year were deprivation. Something else grows in the same soil. Reverence, perhaps, but not the flimsy kind. A reverence based on the realization that the cosmos is not reduced by our inability to hold it intuitively. It remains itself. The stars keep burning, collapsing, swelling, drifting. Galaxies keep turning and merging. Space keeps expanding. Ancient light keeps arriving. And somehow, within one tiny local pocket, matter assembled nervous systems capable of learning what any of that means. There is no need to exaggerate that. We are not the universe, awakening in a mystical slogan sense. We are one very small example of local complexity noticing the wider structure. That is enough, more than enough. Because noticing is not trivial. To notice correctly is one of the rarest things in the world. Most of reality passes without witness. Most of the universe is not seen from here at all. Most of what is seen late. Yet in spite of that, we have extracted patterns that reach astonishingly far. We know the sun's light is delayed. We know the nearest stars are years away in signal time. We know the galaxy is too broad for a shared now. We know Andromeda appears from a pre-human epoch. We know the observable universe has a horizon defined by light travel and cosmic history. We know the early universe left a glow still arriving. Knowledge like that does not make us large. It makes us lucid. And lucidity changes the emotional texture of the night. The old comfort of a sky that looks still and immediate gives way to something deeper, a sky of arrivals, a sky made of layered times, a sky where every bright point is a relation between distance and delay, a sky that is not lying to us exactly, but that will happily let us misunderstand it if we stop at appearance. Perhaps that is one of the quiet moral lessons of the light year. Not moral in the preachy sense, moral in the sense of training perception. It reminds us that reality is often nothing like the version scale-limited intuition first presents. The obvious picture is useful, but shallow. To see more truly, we have to accept mediation, delay, hidden structure, and the possibility that the world is doing something stranger than our first glance suggested. That lesson does not belong only to astronomy. It reaches into systems, history, power, ecology, collapse, even the way we understand one another. Many things that look simple up close turn out to be delayed, layered, non-simultaneous, governed by hidden structure. The light year is just one of the cleanest demonstrations because the universe strips the principle bare. You cannot argue with the speed limit of light. You can only live with what it implies. And what it implies, once we are honest about it, is that every distant star we see is both a presence and a memory. A presence and a memory at once. That double condition is part of what makes the sky so difficult to metabolize emotionally. We are used to categories that separate cleanly. Something is here or gone, present or past, alive or remembered. The distant universe refuses those clean separations. A star can be physically existing now and still only be available to us through old light. A galaxy can be fully real in the present and yet visible only as an earlier version of itself. What reaches us is neither fiction nor immediacy. It is delayed reality. There is something profoundly stabilizing about giving that delay its full weight instead of rushing past it. The usual temptation is to convert cosmic scale into spectacle, to pile up bigger and bigger numbers until the mind gives up and calls the whole thing awe. But numbers by themselves are lazy. The real work begins when we ask what the number does. What does 4 light-years do to a conversation? What does 100,000 light-years do to a galaxy? What does millions of light-years do to the meaning of seeing? What does a cosmic horizon do to the idea that reality should all, in principle, be directly available? Once the questions are framed that way, the light-year stops being a trivia answer and becomes an instrument for dismantling the human default view. The default view is understandable. We assume the world is one stage, and that things on it differ mainly by being nearer or farther, larger or smaller, faster or slower. But a light year introduces a harsher asymmetry. Once distances become large enough, the observer and the observed no longer share one operative present. The farther object is not simply farther away on the same stage, it is farther back in the view available to us. Space turns into a filter for time. And because it does that so reliably, the night sky becomes one of the strangest things any conscious being can regularly encounter. A person can leave a brightly lit room, step into cold air, look up, and, without feeling it at first, stand beneath a map made partly of recent light, partly of older light, partly of very old light, all arriving together as if time itself had been folded into brightness. It is difficult to think of another ordinary experience that contains so much hidden history while feeling so immediate. That last part matters. It feels immediate. The sky does not announce its delays. It does not mark one star as years old, and another as centuries old, and another as millions. It presents itself with tremendous calm. That is why the light year matters so much. It gives us the missing legend for the map. It reveals that what looks like one simultaneous display is actually a layered receipt of distant events and enduring conditions. In that sense, astronomy is a discipline of corrected appearances. The eye says one thing, measurement says another. The eye says the constellations are patterns on a surface. Measurement says they are projections across depth. The eye says the stars are shining now. Measurement says their light left at different times. The eye says Andromeda is a faint blur in our sky. Measurement says that blur began its journey long before human civilization. The eye says darkness is emptiness. Measurement says darkness is the interval over which information travels. This pattern is almost philosophical in its force. Reality keeps exceeding the picture that first seemed sufficient, and instead of making reality less trustworthy, that excess makes it more trustworthy. The universe is not changing the rules on us. It is inviting us to notice that our first glance was never the whole story. There is a kind of moral patience in that. Again, not morality as commandment, but morality as discipline of mind. A willingness to let the world be larger, stranger, and more layered than immediate intuition prefers. The light year trains that willingness, because it will not compress itself into simpler terms without becoming false. Call it a very large distance and you have missed the delay. Call it delay and you may still miss the assault on shared present. Call it an assault on shared present, and you may still miss the way history is preserved in traveling light. Each layer is real. None is enough by itself. That is also why this subject can remain emotionally alive, even for people who know the facts already. Knowing that a light year is a unit of distance is not the same as having allowed that fact to infiltrate your sense of reality. Many things are understood in the verbal sense long before they are understood in the human sense. You can repeat them, teach them, pass exams on them, and still never let them reshape the world around you. The light year becomes powerful only when it begins altering the meaning of ordinary things. sunlight, moonlight, constellations, telescopes, the word neighbor, the word now. Even the idea of news changes under this pressure. News, in daily life, is supposed to be recent. That is part of the concept. Something happened, and now you are being informed about it while it still matters in live relation to your world. Cosmic news is different. A supernova observed in a distant galaxy may be extraordinarily important scientifically, and yet what we are witnessing is the arrival of an old event. We are informed late by default. The lag is not a flaw in the reporting. It is the structure of the medium. That can sound like a limitation, but it is also the only reason cosmology is possible in its modern form. Because we see distant regions as they were long ago, the universe effectively supplies us with snapshots of different eras. We cannot travel back to inspect the young cosmos directly, but we can observe farther, and therefore older, light. In that sense, delay is not merely what prevents immediacy, it is what gives us access to history. This dual role of distance, as both barrier and archive, may be the deepest conceptual reward in the whole story. The same fact that separates us also teaches us. The same finite speed of light that prevents live contact with remote regions lets those remote regions arrive as records of earlier time. The universe withholds the present and offers the past. It denies simultaneity and provides memory. That trade is severe, but it is not empty. It also helps explain why some of the greatest discoveries in astronomy come from looking not at the biggest, brightest nearby things, but at faint, distant, ancient signals. Sometimes, the most revealing evidence is not dramatic to the eye at all. It may be a subtle shift in wavelength, a dim smudge at the edge of detection, a faint background temperature difference mapped across the sky. Human senses alone would never have honored those clues. We had to build instruments to extend perception and mathematics to interpret it. We had to become creatures who could trust a disciplined reading over raw impression. That is not a betrayal of the human. It is one of the highest expressions of the human. The body says the world ends where feeling ends. Inquiry says it does not. The body says what is seen is now. Inquiry says not always. The body says distance is mostly inconvenience. Inquiry says beyond a threshold, it becomes chronology. The body says the sky is a dome. Inquiry says it is depth, delay, and ancient arrival. At some point in this process, the universe begins to feel less hostile and more exact. Not friendly, certainly. Space is not kind in the sentimental sense, but exact. Its indifference is lawful. Its silence has structure. Its remoteness is measurable. The light year belongs to that exactness. It lets us quantify not only separation, but the consequences of separation. It gives rigor to the feeling that the cosmos is not immediately available. It tells us precisely how unavailable. And there is relief in precision. Vagueness is exhausting. To vaguely sense that the universe is huge is one thing. To know how hugeness cashes out, in light travel time, in communication lag, in historical sight, in horizons of observability, is another. One is atmosphere, the other is understanding. Atmosphere can impress, understanding stays. That staying quality is what changes the residue of the night sky. After enough time with the light year, the stars do not become less beautiful. They become more difficult to dismiss. Each one carries more than brightness. It carries a journey. Each galaxy carries more than form. It carries age in transit. The darkness between them carries more than absence. It carries the finite patience required for anything distant to become visible at all. And once that becomes natural, another quiet shift occurs. We stop treating the universe as if its main purpose were to be reached. Much of it may never be reached by bodies like ours. Some of it may never be mutually accessible in any practical sense at all. Yet reach is not the only relationship a mind can have with reality. There is also recognition. There is interpretation. There is the ability to stand in one local pocket of matter and understand that the lights above are not merely lights, but old arrivals from a world too large for immediacy. That relationship is not conquest. It is witness. And witness, in a universe like this, may be the most honest grandeur available to us. Witness is an underrated word. It sounds passive at first, almost secondary, as if the real drama belongs only to the thing being seen. But in a universe structured by distance and delay, Witness becomes one of the most extraordinary relationships imaginable, not because it grants control, because it grants contact of a very particular kind. Old, partial, filtered, delayed, but real. We do not command the stars. We do not step freely between galaxies. We do not watch the early universe unfold in real time. We witness what reaches us, and from that witness we assemble a truthful picture of a reality vastly larger than the scales that made us. That is an astonishing achievement for a species whose ancestors mostly needed to distinguish berries from poison, footprints from wind marks, shelter from exposure. The gap between those origins and the ability to understand light years is almost impossible to overstate. It is easy to glamorize technology and forget what a strange act this really is. A finite creature in a local environment learning to grasp a non-local structure. A nervous system built for the near, learning how the far works. Not naturally, not effortlessly, through patient correction, through tools, through generations of thought. And what is being corrected is not a minor mistake. It is the whole intuitive architecture of perception. We are trained by life on Earth to think of visibility as access. If you can see the mountain, there it is. If you can see the ship, there it is. If you can see the person across the field, you are sharing a moment with them. Even when small delays exist physically, they do not matter to lived experience. Light years destroy that comfort in stages. They reveal that sight is not always presence. Sometimes it is receipt. Sometimes it is afterglow. Sometimes it is evidence that has outlived the moment from which it came. There is no better example of this than the deep sky itself. A telescope pointed outward is not a magical eye peering into a single common now. It is more like a listening device turned toward a choir whose voices left at different times, from different distances, all arriving tonight. Some are recent by cosmic standards, some are ancient. Some are telling us how mature systems behave. Some are telling us what youth looked like on the scale of the universe. Put all that together, and the sky becomes less like a picture and more like a layered composition of arrival times. That composition is one of the reasons cosmic knowledge can feel so strangely intimate once it settles in. Intimate not because the universe becomes small, but because its remoteness becomes legible. A mystery often feels cold when it is only vague. It begins to feel intimate when its structure can be understood. The light year gives the remoteness structure. It tells us why the stars appear as they do, why galaxies come to us from older eras, why the observable universe has a horizon, why the present of distant reality remains inaccessible to direct sight. It turns blank enormity into specific relationships. Specificity matters. Without it, the mind either drifts into empty grandeur or retreats into indifference. But once the structure is clear, every scale acquires its own emotional tone. The moon becomes the first gentle fracture in immediacy. The sun becomes delayed warmth, still astonishingly near compared with the stars. The outer solar system becomes a lesson in how deceptive our diagrams have been. Proxima Centauri becomes the point where conversation becomes generational. The Milky Way becomes a realm too broad for shared present. Andromeda becomes visible pre-human history. The observable universe becomes a horizon of ancient arrivals, beyond which reality may continue without ever entering our witness. Each of those tones is different. That is important. Otherwise, the story flattens into a single note of awe, and awe by itself can become dull. The truth is more textured. Some scales feel tender, some feel lonely, some feel humiliating, some feel clarifying, some feel almost merciful by contrast with what lies beyond them. 8 minutes to the sun starts to sound less like distance than like closeness, once you have lived with the stars for a while. In that sense, light years do not merely enlarge the universe. They rearrange our emotional geography. They make the near feel nearer, the far feel stranger, and the ordinary present feel local rather than universal. They give us a more honest map of what kind of beings we are and what kind of cosmos we inhabit. And that honesty reaches into time just as strongly as it reaches into space. Because one of the deepest changes the light year forces on us is a new relationship with history. Human beings usually think of history as what happened on Earth before us. Ancient empires, migrations, extinctions, revolutions, forgotten generations. But the universe widens the category. History is not only what occurred here before now, it is also what is still arriving from elsewhere. Ancient light turns remote space into active, historical contact. The past is not merely behind us. In some literal sense, it continues to reach us. That is an extraordinary sentence to be able to say truthfully. The past continues to reach us, not metaphorically, in light, in radiation, in delayed evidence crossing emptiness. Once that becomes intuitive, astronomy stops feeling like the study of distant objects and starts feeling like the study of time made visible. Not time in the clock sense alone, but time as layered existence, preserved in transit. A galaxy far away is not simply over there. It is also back then. A star thousands of light years away is not merely remote. It is also old in the form available to us. The cosmic microwave background is not just faint radiation. It is the surviving afterglow of a much younger universe, arriving now after billions of years of expansion. There is nothing mystical about any of this, and that is part of what makes it so powerful. We do not need symbolic language to make it meaningful. The facts are already meaningful. The universe really does allow its earlier conditions to remain visible from later epochs, because light takes time. That is enough. We only have to be quiet enough to feel what that means. Perhaps the strangest part is that the same finite speed of light that limits our access is also what makes that access intelligible. If light were instantaneous, the universe would present one vast, simultaneous surface, at least in appearance. That might feel more satisfying to instinct, but it would hide history from view. We would see remote things as current, but we would lose the natural archive created by travel time. In a very real sense, the universe becomes historically readable, because information is not infinitely fast. That gives the light year a subtle grandeur. It is not just a measurement imposed on an already understood world. It is a key to why the world can be understood historically at all. And yet the frustration never fully leaves. We can admire the archive and still feel the ache of the absent present. We can map Andromeda and still know we are seeing it as it was millions of years ago. We can analyze light from distant galaxies and still know their current state is not available to sight. We can detect the earliest visible glow of cosmic history and still know that even that glow does not take us all the way back to the beginning. The universe keeps enough from us to remain alive as mystery. That balance may be exactly right. Too much access and the sky would lose depth. Too little and it would dissolve into unknowability. Instead, we get something rarer, partial readability at immense scale. Which means that the human place in all this is neither central nor trivial. Central would be false. The cosmos is not built around our convenience, our timing, or our instincts. Trivial would also miss something important. Trivial things do not decode ancient radiation. Trivial things do not learn that the sky is layered time. Trivial things do not derive the structure of a galaxy they have never crossed. We are small, yes. Provincial, yes, but not trivial. We are the sort of local complexity that can discover the limits of locality. That is a very particular dignity, not the dignity of power, the dignity of accurate witness. And once that is felt, the light year begins to seem almost like a moral instrument in the old sense of the word. Something that trains judgment. It punishes arrogance gently. It strips away the assumption that because we can reach across the earth, the universe must ultimately be a larger version of the same game. It strips away the assumption that visibility means presence. It strips away the assumption that now is universal. It strips away the assumption that, if something is real, it must be available to us directly and immediately. What remains after those assumptions are removed is not emptiness. It is clarity, a more demanding, more exact, more adult kind of clarity. And maybe that is why this subject lingers so strongly once it has done its work. A light year is not one of those facts that stays in its own compartment. It leaks. It changes how you think about signals, remoteness, delay, maps, horizons, even ordinary patience. It reveals that much of reality, not only in astronomy but elsewhere, may be layered, non-simultaneous, and mediated by travel time or feedback delay in ways first impressions conceal. The cosmos becomes a masterclass in how misleading immediacy can be. By the time we reach that understanding, the night sky has changed almost completely. The stars are no longer simply beautiful objects overhead. They are distances that took time. The galaxies are no longer simply far systems. They are historical appearances. The darkness is no longer mere backdrop. It is the interval within which the universe becomes visible to itself, at least in tiny local acts of witness like ours. And the final turn, when it comes, is quieter than everything before it. Once you understand that reality mostly reaches us late, the existence of anything close enough to share a present with us begins to feel astonishing. A hand on a table, a face in a room, rain beginning on the roof right now, the sun arriving after only minutes, the moon after only seconds. In a universe dominated by separation, those forms of nearness are no longer ordinary in quite the same way. They become local miracles of coherence. Local miracles of coherence do not sound dramatic until the wider context has done its work. Before that, nearness feels basic, almost invisible. Of course the person across from you can answer before the silence grows strange. Of course the kettle boils in the same room where you are waiting for it. Of course daylight belongs to this day. These things seem too ordinary to deserve wonder. But that is only because we were born inside scales, where response and relation are still fast enough to braid the world together. The light year reveals how unusual that braid really is. On Earth, and especially within the tiny dimensions of human life, the universe is kind enough, or perhaps simply arranged enough, to let cause and effect remain emotionally linked. You speak and hear. You move and arrive. You look, and what you see is, for almost every practical purpose, now. The whole drama of human existence depends on that tightness. Love depends on it. Conflict depends on it. Trust depends on it. Memory and promise depend on it. So does science in its earliest form, the direct observation of a world that answers quickly enough for patterns to be felt before they are formally measured. Outside that local intimacy, the universe loosens the weave. That does not make our world less real. It makes it more specific, more conditional. It means the ordinary is resting on a scale regime so forgiving that we almost never notice it. We think of ourselves as living in reality. In truth, we live in one unusually manageable neighborhood of reality, inside a cosmos where most distances are too severe for lived immediacy, and most signals arrive too late to support the kinds of coherence we take for granted. There is an irony in that. We often assume that greater knowledge should make the local seem less important. Instead, cosmic scale can make it more precious by revealing how non-default it is. A shared present is not the basic condition of the universe. It is a local achievement of short distances. Conversation, touch, weather, sunlight, biological timing, the existence of one day that really feels like one day. All of that belongs to a region where delay remains mercifully small. And mercy is not too strong a word here. The sun is 93 million miles away, an astonishing distance by human standards, and still its light reaches us in only a little over 8 minutes. The moon is nearly 400,000 kilometers away, and still its light takes barely more than a second. If our nearest star were our only source of warmth, there would be no life here to reflect on light years. If Earth's useful relationships were interstellar by default, the world would not feel inhabited in the way it does. We live because the scales that matter biologically are, by cosmic standards, intimate. This is not a sentimental point, it is a structural one. Life as we know it depends on a pocket of space-time, where energy, matter, and feedback are close enough to sustain complexity, without being so violent that complexity is erased. The light year, by showing us what lies beyond that pocket, makes the pocket itself visible. And perhaps that is the final reversal hidden in the title. We click because we expect a story about impossible distance. We get that, but the deeper payoff is that impossible distance teaches us how improbable nearness is. It makes Earth, the moon, and the sun feel less like default scenery and more like a local arrangement of extraordinary accessibility within a universe mostly built from separation. That accessibility does not last forever, of course. Even here, time keeps moving. The sun will not shine indefinitely. Planetary conditions are not eternal. Galaxies evolve. Stars pass through their lives. On the largest scales, nothing we know is static. Yet the temporary nature of our local coherence only sharpens its meaning. We do not live in a universe that guarantees comfort. We live in one that has, for a while, made a small zone of mutual immediacy possible. And inside that zone, consciousness appeared. There is no need to overstate the metaphysical implications of that. Consciousness remains one of the hardest things to speak about without slipping into either reduction or fog. But on the simplest level, here is the fact that matters. A small, local, mortal form of awareness emerged in a place close enough to its star, dense enough with chemistry, and fast enough in feedback to sustain memory and thought. That awareness then learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that the universe outside its native scales is ruled by distances that turn seeing into history. This should never stop feeling strange. Not because it flatters us, but because it doesn't. The story would be easier if it flattered us. If the universe had been arranged so that our minds intuitively matched its deepest scales, then understanding it would say little about us beyond design compatibility. But the fact that our minds do not match those scales, and can still reach toward them through discipline and cumulative knowledge, says something more interesting. It says understanding is not simply what comes naturally. Sometimes understanding is what survives the collapse of what came naturally. The light year is one of the great collapse points. It undoes the easy union between sight and present. It undoes the smooth idea that every distance is just a larger commute. It undoes the quiet assumption that the sky is a map of what exists now in one shared moment. It leaves us with a truer sky, but also a lonelier one. And yet loneliness is only one side of the feeling. The other side is contact. Delayed, ancient, partial, but contact. Across those immense intervals, something still arrives. A photon from a star, a band of radio emission from a distant cloud, a spectral fingerprint from an exoplanet's atmosphere, the faint microwave afterglow of an early universe. Reality crosses emptiness and becomes readable here. That is not the same as possession. It is not conquest, but it is not nothing. It is one of the deepest forms of relation available in a cosmos like this. That is why astronomy can feel so calming, even when its scales are brutal. It is not calming because it makes us important. It is calming because it gives shape to the immensity. It teaches that the universe is not random, in the loose human sense. It is not chaotic, merely because it is beyond our instincts. It is ordered enough that old light can be decoded, distant structures inferred, horizons understood, and histories reconstructed. The very things that make it inaccessible also make it intelligible. A finite speed of light is a limit. It is also a grammar. It tells us how information moves. It tells us why the past remains visible. It tells us why the present is local. It tells us why the deepest universe is reached only through patience. It tells us why some regions may be forever beyond direct mutual contact. The light year is one line in that grammar, but it is an unforgettable one because it compresses so much into a single term. Distance, delay, history, isolation, archive, humility, witness. By the time all of that gathers, the original phrase no longer sounds harmless. Light year. At first it was a clever bit of science language. Now it feels almost like a warning label attached to the cosmos. Beyond this point, intuition will fail. Beyond this point, seeing becomes old news. Beyond this point, travel leaves the scale of one life. Beyond this point, even coexistence may no longer mean shared present. Beyond this point, the universe stops pretending to resemble the world your body evolved to navigate. And still, the body remains where all of this is finally felt. Not directly in the numbers, in the small bodily shocks they produce. Waiting 8 minutes in imagination for sunlight that already left. Feeling the pause in a lunar conversation. Realizing a reply from the nearest star would outlast a childhood. Understanding that the Milky Way is too wide for any simple collective now. Looking at Andromeda and sensing that the light began before us. These are intellectual realizations, yes, but they land in the body as altered feeling. The room becomes more local. The night becomes deeper. The stars become less decorative. Darkness becomes duration. Nearness becomes privilege. And maybe that is where the most human part of the story finally lives. Not in our ability to dominate scale, because we do not. Not in our ability to dissolve scale into slogans, because that only cheapens it. It lives in our ability to let reality correct us, without losing our tenderness toward the local world that formed us. To learn that the universe is harsher, older, and less immediate than instinct assumed, and not become numb. To come back from the thought of galaxies and horizons and ancient background light, and feel a window full of morning sun as something stranger and more intimate than before. Because that light, too, has traveled. Not far in cosmic terms. Barely anywhere, really. Only 8 minutes from a star that is close enough to sustain a living world. Close enough that warmth and life can still belong to one system. Close enough that day feels like day rather than historical signal. After everything the light year teaches, that kind of closeness stops feeling ordinary. It feels almost impossibly generous. And when we carry that feeling back out under the stars, one final understanding begins to settle. The universe is not just larger than our lives. It is larger than the form of present tense our lives first taught us to trust. Most of reality does not arrive as now. It arrives as having been. The sky is full of that grammar, if we know how to read it. Every point of light says the same thing in a different accent. I took time to get here. And that sentence may be the deepest plain truth the sky can offer us. I took time to get here, not just the light from one star, not just one galaxy, but almost everything beyond the immediate neighborhood of Earth is saying some version of that. I took time to get here. I am not what I was when this journey began. You are not what you were. The moment that produced this light is gone where I came from. And yet here it is, arriving now, making contact anyway. There is something profoundly moving about contact anyway. Because the universe, as the light year teaches it to us, is not arranged for easy relation. It is mostly separation under law, mostly intervals too large for bodies like ours to cross, too delayed for minds like ours to inhabit as one shared present. And yet relation still occurs, not through immediacy, but through arrival, not through simultaneity, but through witness. We do not hold the cosmos all at once. We receive it in pieces, and from those pieces, we learn the shape of what exceeds us. That shape is now different from the one we started with. At the beginning, a light year might have seemed like a very large ruler. By this point, it has become something more like a fracture line between human intuition and cosmic reality. On one side lies the world our senses were built for. Rooms, roads, seasons, faces, sunlight that feels present, voices answered before the emotional charge of the question fades. On the other side lies a universe in which distance becomes history, messages become inheritance, and the present thins out until it belongs only to the local. That divide is not absolute. The two sides touch. The moon already begins the lesson. The sun deepens it. The outer planets stretch it. Nearby stars harden it. The galaxy universalizes it. The observable cosmos completes it. There is no single cliff edge where human intuition suddenly dies. There is a long, steady slope into a reality that remains lawful, but ceases to feel native. And still, we can walk that slope in thought. That may be the most hopeful thing in the whole story, though hopeful is perhaps too bright a word. It is steadier than hope, more durable. We do not need the universe to be made for us in order to understand some part of it. We do not need the stars to be reachable in order for their light to matter. We do not need a shared cosmic present in order to learn the structure of cosmic time. Our limitations are real, but they are not the end of the relationship. They are the terms of it. There is wisdom in accepting terms. The alternative is fantasy. Fantasy says every scale will eventually become human scale, every delay merely a temporary inconvenience, every horizon eventually crossed, every remoteness conquered. Perhaps some distances will become more traversable than they seem now. It would be arrogant to claim otherwise with certainty. But even our boldest future cannot erase the deeper lesson. A universe governed by light-speed delay will never become a place of universal immediacy. The stars may someday become destinations to some form of life or machine. They will not become the next neighborhood in the way cities became the next neighborhood once we learned to fly. The light year protects us from that childish compression. It tells us to grow up before the cosmos, not in the sense of becoming cold, but in the sense of becoming precise. And precision, at the end of all this, has not diminished wonder. It has rescued wonder from vagueness. That matters. There is a lesser wonder that comes from being overwhelmed by giant numbers you never metabolize. It burns quickly and leaves almost nothing behind. Then there is the stronger kind, the kind that survives the next day because it has roots. The sun is 8 minutes away in light time, the nearest star more than 4 years. The Milky Way roughly 100,000 light-years across. Andromeda about 2.5 million light-years away. The observable universe, bounded not by a wall, but by the age of cosmic history and the finite travel time of light, shaped further by expansion. These are not just impressive facts. They are anchors that let feeling attach to truth. Once feeling attaches to truth, the residue changes. You start to notice that the ordinary language of everyday life quietly depends on short distances and quick replies. Here, now, soon, nearby, waiting. too far. These phrases all survive, of course, but they no longer feel universal. They feel local, earned by a region of reality where signals are fast enough for such words to make lived sense. Beyond that region, language has to work harder. It starts borrowing from history, archives, horizons, delay, and inference. The light year does not just stretch space. It stretches vocabulary until it admits that the universe is not one single humanly usable field. This is why the final emotional effect is not simply awe, and not simply humility either. It is a kind of recalibration. We come back into ordinary life carrying a more exact sense of proportion. Not proportion in the self-help sense, proportion in the literal sense of relation between things. The room is small, the Earth is small in another way. The Earth-Moon system is intimate by cosmic standards. The Sun is far enough to be astonishing, and near enough to make life possible. The stars are mostly islands. The galaxy is not a neighborhood. Other galaxies are historical apparitions. The visible universe is a partial receipt of what has had time to arrive. And within all of that, human life occupies a very narrow band of coherence. Brief, local, vulnerable, but dense with meaning, because density of meaning is not the same as size. There is no contradiction there unless we insist on one. A symphony is not less, because it is shorter than a mountain range. A human voice is not less, because it occupies less space than a storm. Intimacy and scale are different categories of value. The light year teaches scale. It does not abolish intimacy. In fact, it reveals how rare intimacy is, how local, how completely non-guaranteed in a cosmos dominated by separation. That may be why, after enough time with this idea, the most powerful image is not always the furthest one. Sometimes it is the nearest. A patch of sunlight on the floor, moonlight on a wall, a clear winter constellation over a quiet street. None of these scenes can remain merely pretty once you know what they are carrying. The sunlight is already old when it arrives. The moonlight is delayed. The stars are distributed through depth and time, not pinned to one surface. The beauty does not evaporate under explanation. It deepens because explanation has returned history to what looked immediate. And perhaps that is the final gift here. Not that the universe becomes easier to bear. It does not. In some ways it becomes stranger, more dislocated, less emotionally obedient to the categories we learned as children. But it becomes more real in a way that daily life rarely forces upon us. The ordinary no longer gets to pretend it is all there is. At the same time, the ordinary no longer feels cheap. It feels local, improbable, almost sheltered by comparison. A light year breaks our brains, because brains were built for the near. It breaks them gently, by revealing a universe in which distance is not just more space, but more time, more lag, more separation from the present, more dependence on old arrivals. It breaks the assumption that seeing means sharing the same moment. It breaks the hope that every far place is just a farther version of home. It breaks the illusion that the cosmos is presented to us in the format our instincts expect. And then, if we let it, it rebuilds something better. Not total understanding. We are far from that, and perhaps always will be. Not comfort. The universe does not owe us comfort. What it rebuilds is a cleaner relation between mind and reality. A sky that is no longer decoration, but evidence. Darkness that is no longer simple emptiness, but the interval across which reality comes into view. Distance that is no longer abstract mileage, but delayed existence. Nearness that is no longer taken for granted. So the next time you step outside at night and look up, the stars may feel a little different. Less like lights placed overhead, more like messages crossing durations your body cannot feel directly. Some left a few years ago, some much longer. Some belong to states of the universe that were already old before our species had learned to plant grain, build cities, or keep names alive in writing. And still they arrive, quietly, faithfully, without fanfare. The sky does not rush its truths. It lets them travel. And here we are, on a small world in a small local pocket of usable nearness, able to stand under that delayed brightness and understand, at least partly, what it means. We are small enough to be humbled by it and fortunate enough to witness it. The universe is more extreme than daily life lets us feel, more distant, more layered, more patient, more historically alive. And once the light year has done its work, even the simplest act of looking up becomes harder to dismiss. Because what fills the night is not just space. It is time made visible. And that is why, in the end, The light year stays with us long after the number itself fades. Most of us will not carry around 9.46 trillion kilometers in any living way. The figure is too large, too smooth, too detached from the texture of experience. But the feeling it unlocks can remain. The feeling that the universe is not simply full of objects, but full of journeys. The feeling that almost everything beyond our immediate world reaches us late. The feeling that the sky is not a ceiling of lights, but a field of ancient arrivals still making their way into one small place where they can be noticed. There is a quiet generosity in that word, noticed. The cosmos does not need our notice. Galaxies would turn without it. Stars would ignite, age, and die without it. Space would expand. Background radiation would cool and stretch. None of this depends on us. Yet the fact that it does not depend on us does not make our noticing trivial. It makes it honest. We are not required by the universe, and we can still understand enough to be changed by it. That is a rarer kind of relationship than importance. The light year teaches that relationship with unusual clarity, because it removes the flattering versions first. It removes the idea that our scales are normal scales. It removes the idea that the present is globally available. It removes the idea that distance is merely an engineering inconvenience. It removes the idea that seeing means direct contact with what is happening now. Once those comforts are gone, what remains is harder, but it is also cleaner. A being on one world, in one era, under one local sky, receiving what has had time to arrive. And time to arrive is the whole story. The moon needs a little over a second, the sun a little over 8 minutes, the nearest star more than 4 years, the farther reaches of our galaxy tens of thousands of years, Andromeda millions, the deep universe billions. The oldest visible light we can detect comes not as stars at all, but as an ancient afterglow from a young cosmos, stretched thin across time and expansion until instruments can catch it as a whisper. Each step outward is another step away from immediacy. Each step outward is another proof that the universe does not present itself in the format our ancestors needed to survive. And yet survival gave rise to curiosity, and curiosity built witness. That may be the most beautiful inversion in the whole thing. The very brain that breaks under the honest meaning of a light year is the same kind of brain that can slowly reassemble itself around that meaning. We were not born feeling these scales. We had to learn them. We had to build chains of thought strong enough to carry us where instinct could not go. We had to let old habits of perception fail without treating that failure as defeat. That is what science at its best often is. Not a collection of cold facts, but a disciplined way of surviving the collapse of first impressions. The first impression says the stars are here now, together, on one surface. The disciplined view says no, they are scattered through depth and time. The first impression says the universe is one visible present, extended outward. The disciplined view says no, it is a layered arrival of signals from different ages. The first impression says far away means difficult to reach. The disciplined view says no, far enough away means different kinds of relation altogether. The first impression says distance is spatial. The disciplined view says at cosmic scale, distance is inseparable from delay. That is why the light year never really belonged only to astronomy. It belongs to any deep attempt to understand reality beyond the scales that formed us. It is a reminder that local experience can be valid and still wildly incomplete, that the world may obey laws our instincts do not predict, that what seems immediate may be historical, what seems visible may be delayed, what seems unified may be stitched together from non-simultaneous parts. These are cosmic lessons. But they are also lessons in perception itself. Still, the sky remains the cleanest classroom, because you can stand beneath it with no instrument at all and feel, at least dimly, the shape of the truth. Not all of it, never all of it, but enough. Enough to know that the moon is not present without delay. Enough to know that the warmth on your skin left the sun minutes ago. Enough to know that the stars are not arranged on a dome, and that some of the faintest visible things are reaching you from chapters of reality unimaginably remote from daily life. Enough to know that darkness is full of transit, and that your eyes are participating in histories too large to hold all at once. That participation is fragile. It depends on clear skies, instruments, education, memory, language, peace, and the continuity of a culture that values knowing. None of those should be taken for granted. The ability to understand the light year is itself a local achievement of civilization, just as much as the ability to live under one star and make sense of its delayed light. We often treat knowledge as though it appears automatically wherever facts exist. It does not. It has to be carried, taught, preserved, rebuilt. A species can look up for thousands of years before it fully understands what it is seeing. And even then, understanding comes unevenly. One part is math, one part is image, one part is bodily unease, one part is changed perception. Perhaps that is the right way for such a truth to arrive, gradually, the same way the universe arrives. Not all at once, but through patient accumulation. The longer I sit with this subject, the less the word distance feels sufficient. Distance is too neutral, too geometric. A light year is not neutral in its consequences. It means delay, yes, but also unshared present, preserved past, unreachable scales, broken simultaneity, and a local world suddenly revealed as sheltered. It means that the ordinary act of looking is no longer ordinary once the object is far enough away. It means that there are forms of existence we can know only through what they once were. It means that the present, which feels so solid in daily life, is actually a small, warm island surrounded by enormous seas of transit. And islands are not insignificant because they are islands. They are significant because they are habitable. That may be the gentlest way to end this. Not with grand declarations about our destiny, and not with a neat philosophical slogan, but with the simple recognition that the nearness we live inside is unusual enough to deserve gratitude, and the distance beyond it is real enough to deserve honesty. We are creatures of the island, not of the whole sea, but we have learned enough to read the waves, enough to look into darkness and understand that what reaches us took time, enough to let old light change the meaning of now. So when night comes again and you look up, the stars may no longer feel merely far. They may feel patient. The galaxy may no longer feel like a decorative word. It may feel too large for any simple shared moment. And the space between things may no longer feel empty. It may feel charged with the quiet fact that reality takes time to become visible. That is the deepest payoff of the title. A light year breaks our brains not because it is a spectacular number, but because it reveals that the universe is built on terms our brains were never designed to find intuitive. Then, slowly, if we let the idea stay, it gives us a better brain for the task. Not bigger, not cosmic, just better calibrated, more honest about delay, more alert to hidden structure, more able to hold intimacy and immensity without forcing either one to disappear. And once that recalibration happens, the ordinary world is never quite ordinary again. The sun is no longer simply up there. It is a star near enough to keep life coherent. The moon is no longer simply a bright companion. It is a nearby world, still close enough to answer within one stretched breath. The constellations are no longer patterns drawn on blackness. They are apparent alignments across depth and time. And the night itself becomes what it always was, though we had not yet learned to feel it fully. A place where time shines,